Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing all the 2022 releases that I read this year. With a backlog, it is so hard to acquire new books and to stay on top of new releases, but at the same time I really do enjoy reading new releases and discussing them, so it's a really hard balance. But I was able to read, I think, 26 new releases, counting my manga, but today we are only going to be discussing the books I read that are 22 releases. So no manga today. So that's going to be about 16, 17 books, I think. But without further ado, let's get into these 22 releases. So we are gonna kind of go in order. I basically put it into three piles. I put it into the books that didn't work for me, the books that were good, worked well enough, and also books that I did really enjoy. And then the final pile is the books that were exceptional, really worked for me, are going to be like 4.5 5-star reads. So first in the category of books that just didn't work for me, I have probably one of my lowest rated books of the year, which is Vows of Empire, which is the third and final book in the Bonds of Brass series. This series is by Emily Skrunsky. I read the entire series this year. While Vows of Empire was not quite as bad as the sequel, Oath of Legacy, which is the second book, this still wasn't great. The series just really took a turn into a direction that I was not expecting based on how good I interpreted the first book to be. The first book was a 4-star, the second book really went downhill, I did not enjoy it. This book was slightly better, like I said, but still it was by far a disappointment and it was just, a lot of things didn't work for me. I actually have a review of this book if you want to know more of my thoughts and opinions on this series. Overall, this is a very like fun, rompy, fast-paced, action-y, soap opera-y kind of space opera sci-fi series. If that's something you're interested in, you might enjoy this. It didn't quite work for me, and again, I have a review all about why I didn't enjoy it. So the next book I have is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axio. This I think I gave like a solid 3 stars, 2.75 stars. It's very just mid. I think I also did a discussion where I used this book as like kind of a prop, a jumping off point for that discussion. I think the video is called Why Fantasy Books Don't Always Work for Me. So I do have some reasoning behind why I didn't love this. Mostly it felt like there was just a tonal problem and like a directional problem. It felt like this story wanted to be like a slow-paced character-driven story, but was like forced to be a fast-paced plot-driven story, which just didn't work for the character arc or what the story felt like it was trying to go for. But this is a YA fantasy novel about a young girl who decides to sacrifice herself and gets spirited away to like the ghostly realm, the spirit realm, where she is going to be the dragon's bride or the Dragon Prince's Bride, something along those lines. It had a lot of like buzzwords of stuff that I enjoy. Spirit away into a fantastical world, girl who has like an obstacle to do. Like it just had a lot of things that I thought I would have really enjoyed, but it just didn't quite hit that mark. And it didn't really give me that character-driven, girl coming into her own power kind of story that I was looking for and that I thought this was trying to achieve. But it wasn't like a bad book. I think Axio has a lot of potential as a writer. I think she has written another book besides this one. But overall, this just felt like a rushed story. And then the final one in like the disappointing, not great books category is going to be Icebreakers. And this is definitely a book I rated higher, so it's definitely more on the disappointing side than like this was actually not a great book side, because I actually really loved this in a lot of ways and I really connected to it in a lot of ways. But Icebreaker is a YA contemporary novel following a couple of college students, mainly Mickey, who is our main character, and he is joining the hockey team and waiting until he is old enough to get drafted into the National Hockey League as a professional hockey player. And he butts heads, he's just not a team player, and you know, he's just kind of a little bit snotty about his skills and stuff. And so it's kind of a story of him and his mental health journey and his sexuality journey and coming out. But I feel like this story was also trying to have that coming of age, coming into one's own, learning to work as a team kind of like sports story. And it didn't quite achieve that. It seemed a little bit too focused on the other plot points. And so some of Mickey coming into his own and getting better as a player kind of was like pushed to the side and really rushed through and skipped over. And it just just didn't feel like a completely satisfying story, which is so sad because I loved these two characters. I especially loved Mickey and his journey, and I really just loved his storyline and just like the character arc that he's set up to go through. But again, the ending just felt really rushed. I just felt like there could have been so much more. This book could have been so much longer and it could have covered so many more things. And I would have loved to see Mickey not just evolve as a person, but evolve as a hockey player and a teammate. I thought that would have made the ending a lot more satisfying. So this was like a 3.75 stars because I did love so much in this book, but it ended up just being disappointing because it wasn't quite there and I was so sad. So next we are getting into my pile of books that were good to like great reads for me this year. And these are in no particular order. I literally just have them in a pile. So first off, we are going to be talking about the Atlas 6, which again I gave like a 3.75 stars to. This is basically about a group of magicians that are gathered together in a competition to join the Society of the Alexandria Library. And this is basically like just pretty mean people doing things. They're not really doing magic, they're just kind of like living in this house together, kind of doing stuff, kind of talking about the theoretical magic. It's kind of a weird book, but I also kind of loved it. It's just this like slow progression of the characters just like talking through their every little like thought and moment and what they think about all the other characters. And it's just so interesting because we don't really get a lot of backstory for the characters, and we don't obviously get a lot of like forward momentum either. It's really just like the characters thinking moment by moment and assessing things, and it just worked for me. I liked it, I enjoyed it, it was atmospheric. This is not for everybody, but I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to reading the sequel, which came out this year as well. I should say that this is not technically a 2022 release. The official publication is released in 2022, but the original indie release was 2020, I think, but I'm counting it because it is a 2022 official publication release. But yes, the second book also came out this year, so I still have to buy and read that. Next, we have a real 2022 release, which is going to be Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, and this is the second book in the Black Sun. What is the series called? I think it's like Earth and Sky series or something along those lines, but this is an indigenous adult fantasy novel in a setting that is inspired by like pre-Columbia America, and I really enjoy this series. This one was not quite as good as the first one in my opinion, but I still really liked it. I love following this cast of characters. I love seeing the plot evolve. This series is a lot of just watching people travel to get to the place to see the conflict, but I don't really mind it because again, I love the characters. I like seeing their journeys, but like this is not my favorite fantasy series. It's good, but it's not my favorite, but I do enjoy reading it. Next we have Where the Drowned Girls Go by Shauna McGuire, and this is a short adult novella fantasy series, and I believe this is either the 7th or the 8th book in the Every Heart a Doorway series. And this one is part of the present day, so we're following the main cast. Basically in this series, there is a school for portal children that are kind of traumatized by their portal experiences, and there is another school that has a very different philosophy of how to deal with these children, or one of our side characters from this series decides to go to that school and test out if it's better there. This is probably like my 4th favorite in the series or 5th favorite, so like it's right in the middle. It's not like my favorite, but it's not my least favorite either. I enjoyed it, but I honestly don't think about it a ton in terms of the series. Next, I have Lore Olympus Volume 2. This is another 2022 release because it is being published as a webcomic, so I'm not exactly sure when this actually came out. Probably 2020 or maybe even 2019, I'm not sure. This is still a part of season 1 of the webcomic, and I'm just enjoying reading these. The 3rd volume also came out this year, which I have not bought and read, but I'm really enjoying this. This is like an adult fantasy mythology story, basically a retelling of Greek myth of Hades and Persephone. I do feel like it might be better in comic form just because it's very binge worthy. It's very like scroll worthy, but also I do really love Rebecca's art style. I really like her use of shapes and colors, so it's really nice to get to see that in printed form as well. But yeah, I like Lore Olympus, and it's a pretty good series in my opinion. So next we have Akata Woman by Nindi Okorafor, which is the 3rd book in the Akata Witch series, and this is a young adult series following a girl named Sunny who has moved to Nigeria with her family and finds out that she is actually a leopard person, which means that she has magic. And so her and her group of friends are like solving magical mysteries and defeating evil and gaining powers. And again, this is like not my favorite in the series, but I did really enjoy it. I gave it like another 3.75 stars. It's a really enjoyable middle grade / YA fantasy. I feel like it really transitions really well from the ages, and I just really like the magic in the world in here. And yeah, it's just a really enjoyable series. Not my favorite series, but still really enjoyable, and I will continue to read the books. For the next 2020 release, we have Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This again is a book that was first indie published. So just to clarify, I kept saying indie published in this video both for this and the Atlas 6, but what I meant was self-published. I think both of these works were self-published, and so that's a different thing. So I just wanted to make that distinction. So it might have been originally published in 2021, but this released under a publisher in 2022, so I'm counting it again as a 2022 release. And this is a cozy fantasy adult story, basically following an orc who decides to give up her life of adventuring in order to open a coffee shop, and it's just kind of her journey of opening the coffee shop, gaining a found family, just very cozy vibes, very enjoyable, very low stakes, but high emotional stakes. So yeah, really enjoyable. Again, like 3.75 stars. Definitely recommend this, but like, again, not my favorite of all time, but definitely one of the best things I read this year in terms of enjoyment. Next, we have How to Excavate a Heart, and this is a YA contemporary coming of age queer holiday Jewish romance story, and this is in the middle category because, again, it's not my favorite book of all time, not my favorite contemporary romance of all time, but it was enjoyable. And again, this is published by HarperCollins, and so as per request of the union, we are not reviewing these books. I have not put up my public review for this book yet. We are waiting for HarperCollins to talk with the union and to, give people more money that they're asking for. So next for our 2020 releases, we have another young adult contemporary, and this is The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. And this story is about Yami and her brother who transferred to a Catholic school. Yami is not out to her mother, but she was slowly coming out to her friends, had a really bad coming out with one of her friends, and decides to stay in the closet forever, especially at this Catholic school. And so hijinks ensues, especially as she starts to fall for a girl, which was not in her plans. This was cute, fun, definitely recommend. And so the last book in the good to great category is Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is the third book in the Locked Tomb series, and this is a sci-fi fantasy, lesbians in space, gothic kind of book. Every book is different from itself. The series is confusing and convoluted, but also just so great. Harrow, the second book, is definitely my favorite, and this is definitely my least favorite book, but I still really enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it a lot more than some people. For some people, it just felt a little too side questy for, which I get. I just love how weird this series is, and it's such a fun series. There's a lot of gore and body horror, and again, it's confusing as hell, but it works for me. I really like it. So let's get into the great and greater category. So starting off, we have, this is Shorefall, because I don't actually own a physical copy, but this is a stand-in for Locklands, which is the third and final book in this Foundry Side series. I'm really sad because I accidentally bent the cover of this one, but maybe this means I'm supposed to get the hardcovers of all these books. Foundry Side is a fantasy series that takes place in a world where there is a alchemisty, magic-y kind of thing where you can take an object and imbue it with different properties, like changing what the item thinks its gravity is, stuff like that. It's a really interesting system, and I read this entire series this year. I enjoyed the first two books. It's a very action-y, plot-heavy book, but there's still a lot of character and charm to it as well. It's a pretty well-balanced series in my mind, even though it does lean into the plot aspect of the series. But the final book, Locklands, really was the best book in the series, and it just was a really good fantasy book. Again, it is like that heavy kind of plot-driven story, but in this final book, we have jumped far into the future, like 8 years into the future, and we're seeing the consequences and the outcomes of everything that we've seen in the first two books. And just like the world building, the new society that was brought into this final book was so interesting. Final conflict was actiony and fun, and again, there were consequences for all the actions. I feel very torn up about the ending. Like, it's not a super happy ending. It's very bittersweet, and in some respects I'm like, ooh, did I actually like that ending? But again, there were consequences. Not everybody made it out alive in a fantasy ending where it was touted as being this very, like, end of the world kind of situation. So definitely the best in the series, like a solid 4.25. Really, really strong conclusion to this series. We also have a very new release in the great to greater category, which is Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Corcoran. This is an adult rom-com story, and this follows Ellie, who gets herself into a situation where she is posing as a fake fiance to her landlord, and lo and behold, his sister happens to be the girl she hooked up with last year and kind of still is heartbroken up about. The series is just as kooky and crazy as that premise makes it sound, but at the heart of it, Ellie is just a down on her luck character who is just really struggling with her self-esteem and where to go with her career and life, and I just really connected to her fourth life crisis, and I just really connected to how messy all these characters are. There are contrivances in the plot, there is like a little bit of a cheating plot line as well as lots of miscommunication, so this isn't going to be for everybody. A lot of people are not going to like this at all. It just worked for me. I just really connected to Ellie and where she is in her life, and I loved just seeing her have this really messy story. This book was just really, really cathartic for me. I really enjoyed it. Next, we have another finale in a series, which is going to be Greywaren by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a spin-off of The Raven Boys, and it follows Ronan and his antics as he meets other people like him who have the ability to dream things into existence. This series is just a really slow build of character, of watching characters that are slightly unlikable become your new best friends. I don't know how Maggie does it. She just makes really flawed, unlikable people just really compelling to watch. I loved some of these characters' arcs, but watching other characters, just learning to understand them and watching them get everything that they want, just really compelling. I just love this series. There are definitely things in this series that I don't love, choices that were made, character bird that I don't like, but overall this book especially just was such a great finale, and I just really loved it. I just really had a good time reading it too, like the reading, actual process of reading it, physically, slowly enjoying it, savoring it was just really excellent. This might be my favorite in the series. I just really enjoyed it. I really loved this conclusion. I just really loved Maggie's writing and how she wrote these characters. It was a really good read for me. Another finale we have is A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. This is another series that I read entirely this year, and this is the Monk and Robot duology, so, you know, not a very impressive series because it's very small, but this is an adult sci-fi series, and I really enjoyed this series, and I really enjoyed this book. Again, this is like quarter life, midlife crisis kind of situation. Our main character is a monk, and they, in the first book, decide to become a tea service monk, which means they travel around visiting different little villages in this like utopian future society that is like very green, and it's them just kind of being like a therapist for people and helping them out. And in this book, it's really like about self-care and figuring out like purpose and do you need purpose kind of thing, and it really just touched with me. I might like this first book a little bit more, but again, this was a really strong conclusion. I just love this series overall. Becky Chambers is definitely solidly one of my favorite writers. I really like this. But that does it for the 2020 releases, but I'm not quite done yet because I'm currently reading a 2022 release, or at least trying to, and that would be Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. This is one of the books that I wanted to finish before the end of the year, and I think I'm like about 80 pages into it, but this is a chunker. This is like a 550 page book, and I have 10 days left to read it. I got the audiobook in from my library, so that is definitely going to be a help to me at this time. But yes, I'm trying to finish out the year at least reading this book and one other one, but we will see. So I can't really talk about my thoughts and opinions other than this is a YA fantasy adventure paranormal book, kind of a King Arthur retelling, and our main character Bree in the first book finds this secret society on this college campus that she's attending and slowly joins this magical society. Again, it's not like my favorite fantasy series of all time, but it's definitely up there in some of the better fantasy YA series that have come out recently, or at least one of the series that has more general appeal for different ages. I do not like one of the love interests at all. Like, I really don't like him, but this book is probably going to be dealing a lot with him, so I guess I will have to learn to love him. But it's fine because I like Bree and I like her story and her magic and her history. But yeah, this has a lot to offer as a series, and I'm excited to read the second book and see how it goes. So yes, those are all the 2022 releases that I read this year. Let me know what 2022 releases you read, what was some good ones for you. There were so many good books that came out this year, but I say that every year and it's so hard to keep up. But yes, I would love to know. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.